Yeah. Okay. We can speak about it,
Yes.
but not on mic.
Est-ce qu'on est prêt?
On est prêts, nous?
You're not filming this?
No.
No?
No.
Okay. I want to make sure.
I'm taking notes.
Yes.
I forgot my pen.
And we don't
Journalist?
register, right?
Are you a journalist?
No, not at
No,
all.
madam.
No.
We don't register it. Oui.
That's what you normally do. I assume because that's your podcast. You have a
Yes,
podcast.
yes, this is the podcast. Okay. On est prêt.
Oh, OK.
We call it a little action.
Oui, vas-y. Gwe, Wajia, bonjour. This is our first podcast from the NFB space near Place des Festivals. Right now we can see the beautiful scenography of the Montreal First Peoples Festival, which is slowly taking place already. Up in the sky, there is the 100-foot teepee. That is the signature of our presence on Place des Festivals. So it starts tonight with two beautiful concerts. So welcome everybody to see John Metza, a brand new artist with a brand new album that will be launched tonight under the backing of Nikamo, the Samian's disc company. So and is I can tell you very promising. And of course, Animaura is already known. But speaking of well-known person, we have very honor here to have Ellen Gabriel as a guest for this podcast. Ellen has a new film. Actually, I think it's the first feature film that she made. So we will have to, we will later have more on this. But first of all, Hélène, welcome to Rue Adadegen. Yes. You're... Okay, so we will try to speak a bit louder. Okay. I know you can. But how did you come to film? Because your first formation education was in visual arts rather than cinema by itself.
Well, I've always been interested in film, telling stories through film. During the pandemic, there was an opportunity to do online classes. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I did, and it got me more interested. And, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about 1990 and the crisis and what actually happened. So my motivation was really to reclaim that narrative that has been told about us from our perspective. And that we're not the violent people that Canada and Quebec want you to think about us, that we're actually human beings and we're trying our best to survive under colonial oppression. So, that's part of my motivation, having worked at the Cultural Center as well. We had done a few very short videos for the school, the Kanyakaha Mohawk Language School. So it got me interested in filmmaking.
And so you take this online course, and you did your first short film. The first one, is it the one who won at the Great Prize of the Art Council?
That was the first one, but it was my thesis film in the New York Film Academy. So I was learning, at that time, how to create a story that is of historical significance. And just like this one, Oyakudo, Hanging Tobacco, it's also of historical significance that I think is important for us to be able to leave as a legacy for this generation as well, but also for future, because we're not going to be around here forever. So that's part of the motivation as well.
I suppose for me it was a surprise, because it doesn't happen often that a short film won the greatest award of the Art Councils of Montreal. And for a first film also, it was very impressive. How did you receive this news?
I was speechless. I really didn't know what to say, because I had assumed I wasn't going to win. There was so many, wonderful candidates and strong candidates at that time. And Hannah Claus, an artist and friend, had nominated me, and I said, yeah, okay, and not realizing, what the future would hold. So I was very surprised, very honored that the Conseil in the Montreal and its Art Council to include someone like me, who is mostly viewed as a radical within the Indigenous movement, and to have an acknowledgement of that story of the women on the very first day in July 11th in 1990. It was it warmed my heart, and I was very honored.
And you wanted to I know you told many times that there is a lot still to be told about
Here's somebody who goes and knocks on the door of an elder and said, do you need some wood chopping? Do you need some help with something? It's not someone who is a gangster. And so there's some revelations about the men who blocked the Mercier Bridge, why they did it, the hesitancy, but also understanding that an attack was committed by the SWAT team, and including the army, would have included the army, that lives would be lost, more lives would be lost. So it's that story of why would you do something like that, knowing that your life and your community would be in peril as well, so it's that story of trying to humanize those faces that the media really didn't understand at the time. The media had no clue who Indigenous people were, right? They had no clue. They thought we were extinct. And so when I ask questions about what does sovereignty mean to you, do you think it was worth it? So those are some of the questions that I ask, and I always like to include Kanyakaha, my language, because it is something that we use to survive. It's part of our relationship with the land, which to me is what this story is really about, is the extent, the lengths that Indigenous people will go to protect the land what's left of our land that we can use, and so Hanging Tobacco, or Oyakudo, is sort of that bringing an old word that is not used anymore, whereby, in the past, our ancestors would always carry tobacco with them. And, tobacco is very sacred. It's a very important part of our protocols, about our culture. And they brought it with them when they went to war. And that a warrior is not a man necessarily. It also includes women. And women were there on the front lines during 1990, making the decisions. They weren't just feeding the men. You know, they were feeding them also spiritually and mentally to support them. So it's a collective effort against, you know, this fierce oppression, this centuries old struggle that we have had with the colonizer, and hopefully it will wake up again, as it did in 1990. It'll wake Indigenous people up again, because I feel like sometimes we move away. If it's not in the news, it's not there. But also wake up Canadians, because from what happened in 1990 was the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, which started the ball rolling, which became, you know, like recommendations, calls to action, the TRC, the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women, and all those recommendations are sitting on shelves. They're barely even implemented by Canada or Quebec. So this is all part of that process of what was the spark, and that spark was Kanesatake and Kahnawake.
Yeah, and I suppose that it is the response to the objection I will hear. I am sure. Why do you come back to that old story? It's not that old. It's still alive, and there is still issues that have to be settled.
Well, I think because it's never been resolved. You know, I on my way in my drive here, I noticed the land that this developer claims they're making driveways into fields that, you know, my father used to bale hay there. You know, there was agreement between him and some of the Quebecois who claimed that land, that he could bale hay, because we used to have horses. My father had horses, and so it's unresolved. You know, the government of Canada and Quebec still feel that they have the right to steal land. And, you know, Kanesatake was occupied by the Seminary of St. Sulpice, who colluded with the government of Canada to steal our land. And so this history is not really known, because the Seminary of St. Sulpice were not the Jesuits. You know, they never took an oath to poverty. They were rich blue bloods from France. And their actions is felt by us today by being squeezed into further.
And she was often telling me with a very sad look, you know, my community is a wounded community, Kanesatake. But speaking about healing, I know you work a lot to the revival or the transmission of the language. And can you speak, because yesterday the film Tessinan was interesting, because the Joséphine Bacon illustrated in her film this link, close link with the ancestral tongue and the land. And I suppose you mentioned it, and I would like to hear what are the challenge you have now with the language in Kanesatake?
Well, I no longer work in the language anymore. Okay. I know there's, you know, you have Canadian Heritage who, for all the good intentions that they have, it's not enough. It's not sufficient, because the changes in regards to support for Indigenous languages should have been done, you know, decades ago. We've lost so many speakers in the time that it took for Canada to wake up, and you know, the international pressure was on them as well. I went to the United Nations and talked about Indigenous languages along with other speakers, and even our own people at that time. You know, this is I'm talking about 15 years ago, if not a little bit longer. Even our own people were not talking about preservation of our languages. They were too busy with all the priorities the government of Canada was giving them. You know, social issues, housing, policing, and you know, so we are distracted by the colonizers' so-called priorities for us, right? They decide for us what those priorities are. So Indigenous languages, the support even amongst our own people was not quick enough. The support by Canada was not quick enough. I went to day school. I didn't go to residential school. I went to day school. My parents went to day school. We spoke Kanya-Kaha in my home when I was growing up, and I was taught in English. You know, so for me, my whole education was about erasing my identity, because in the history classes, it was like, the Iroquois, they're the most warlike, they're the most vicious, right? And that's, those are my people, those are my ancestors. And so it takes a lot of effort, I think, for my generation anyways, to not feel ashamed, and to say, I want to learn my language, like that's my first language. I want to learn about my culture. And I always tell people, I don't care if you're Christian, Buddhist, whatever you are right now in this day and age, you are all people of the Longhouse. That is our ancestors, right? And to hear about the struggles, because in the Cultural Center, it developed the At the Woods Edge book, the history book, that talks about before contact. And it also talks about at the time of contact, when the Seminary of St. Sulpice brought our people, some of our people, Mohawks, Nipissings, and Algonquins, to Kanesatake, which they knew there were already people there. Kanesatake already existed before the Seminary of St. Sulpice brought the Christian Indians. The Seminary of St. Sulpice was one of the largest landowners in Canada. They owned the island of Montreal, right? And so they were getting complaints from settlers that the Indians were too rowdy, or when they got drunk, they were too loud. So they had to forcibly remove us from this island. And so some went to Kahnawake and Akwesasne, and some came to Kanesatake. But from the moment of contact, the Sulpicians and the Crown lied. You can cut trees over here, but you have to tell us. The Mohawks were saying to them. And the minute that our people were using, started cutting wood, because we knew the land, we knew where was the medicines growing, not to touch those areas. So the minute our people started cutting wood for heat or for cooking, the seminary, who were rich, were able to buy a police force, and they started brutalizing the people. So this part of that history, which is not in my film, but is part of our history, I think the youth do not know that. And I'm hoping to inspire them and spark that interest in their ancestry, in the history of the community that they are growing up in, because it is not it's not a quiet history. It's a very tumultuous history for over 300 years. And before that, I think, and this goes to the archaeologists who create these lies and this mythological St. Lawrence Iroquois. That is our people. That are the people from Kanesatake. And so every time we turn around, there's always like, oh no, it's not yours. It actually belongs to that. And they decide what our ancestry is. They decide what our heritage is. And so the more films that I want to do, I want to address those issues. Why does Canada and Quebec and all the other provinces want to smother and erase our history and our connection to the land? So this film is really a wonderful way to express that frustration, but also to tell the richness of the stories and the richness of the culture, of why we still persist. We persist to resist, and what motivates us.
Yes. And of course, the history of the Sulpician actions on this island has still to be written down, and because there was, you mentioned it, there was Aboriginal peoples living on the mountain, and they move it to Oka, and after that they try to move it to move the community to Ontario. It's really the...
Yeah, we have relatives living in Wata, Northern Ontario, who were told, the Sulpicians said, well, we have land for you. They wanted to really get rid of us. And we have land for you. It's reserved for you. And you can grow potatoes, this big. And it's rich agricultural land. And we'll lend you money to go. Because, at that time, it wasn't like nobody had cars. There was a steamship that could maybe carry people a bit of the ways. Maybe railroad, horse and buggy. And when they got there, they just saw it was all rocks. Mostly rocks, right? And so when they returned, they came back and their houses and their lands were occupied by Quebecois farmers. They sold their land. And so some of the people took them in. And because they were so evil, the Sulpicians, they were so brutal and violent against our people, some said, okay, we're going to go to Wata or Gibson. So we have a connection there. And, the story of Kanesatake, and we don't put enough emphasis on the Seminary of St. Sulpice for their guilt in creating the situation that we see today in 2026. It's Canada, it's so many actors, private, third parties, the activity of land dispossession continues for Indigenous people. We see that with the Building Canada Act. We hear ignorant statements from Prime Minister Carney saying, because of the wildfires, maybe we should just move out all the Indigenous people to the south, right? And so they're dispossessing our people. They're saying that we cannot live on the land unless they say so. So throughout all the changes that have happened in the 36 years, when we look at Canada, they haven't changed. They haven't changed. And even for this film, I was going to interview a general, and he says, well, I wasn't really there. I was not a general at the time, but you can speak with my assistant and maybe we can set things up because I wanted to get the Canadian Army's perspective, right? I tried with the SQ as well. And so I was talking to his assistant and she was asking me, well, who did you interview? I said, I'm not going to tell you that. And she says, well, we want to know what they are saying. I said, well, I'm not going to have the Canadian Army dictate to me what is my film, my documentary, and who is saying what. And I said, I don't think you have changed. I don't think the Canadian Army has evolved at all in the last 36 years. And she said to me, well, if the crisis were to happen today, it would be a very different story. And so I said, I was thinking, so you would have come in right away then, probably. You would have no trouble killing, innocent people who have a right to protect their land. We have a right to make those barricades because the government doesn't listen, doesn't negotiate. So for me, I find that there's a lot of rhetoric from institutions like the Canadian Army or like the Canadian or Quebec government that they're just hollow words. They continue this legal fallacy that they can take our land. We were not conquered people. We were allies. There were some nations that were allies with the French and some allies with the English. And after the War of 1812, it totally decimated our communities and, sticking us onto reserves so that more settlers could come in. Right. So this is a history that I think is still not being spoken of, not being taught in the curriculums of the provinces. And I don't think they care. I don't think government cares. It's like we are always struggling to say, well, and I think the TRC talked about it, teach education, teach Canada's colonial genocidal history. And maybe then we'll have reconciliation. Because reconciliation is not happening. Like Montreal, like you said, the city of Montreal had an overture of reconciliation towards, me and my film, but it was also a symbolic for all Indigenous people. But I think as a society as a whole, reconciliation has fallen on our shoulders. We're not the ones who disrupted the relationship. It's Canada, it's the Crown, it's all the provinces. So really, reconciliation should be on their shoulders. It's not up to the government. Canadians also have to get involved in this.
I don't know if it is something that is related with the situation you just described. But yesterday at the opening, normally we have representative from the city, from the Quebec government and federal government, and of course the Assembly of First Nations. And yesterday, on the governmental side, nobody except the city of Montreal, but nobody from the federal, nobody for the provincial. And the film we were going to present that night called Nitassinan, which means our land. And the film explained exactly the meaning of the word. Maybe this is they were not happy with the framework in which they would have to speak if they had come.
Well, I think like I'll just call them the colonizer. Any kind of government that's that exists on Turtle Island, they don't want the truth. They don't like the truth. They don't like the fact that Indigenous people are still rising up and saying, "This is our land." You can put all the buildings you like on it and pretend that it's worth more with the buildings on it, but for us, it's priceless. It's our land. We are there to protect not just the people, the humans, but we're also there to protect the wildlife, nature, the plants, the medicines. Those are the things that helped us survive colonization, right? And so the federal government, the provincial governments, I think that they are frustrated that we are not completely assimilated and completely bowing down to whatever it is that they claim is the truth. They are the ones who are the liars. They do not want us to expose them for the hypocritical entities that they are. And it's a really difficult thing, I think, for government to admit it, because now, in present time, when we look at the chaos, it is really corporations that are controlling the government, right? And with all this stuff, all this craziness that we see for AI, rare earth metals, who is standing in the way? As usual, Indigenous people. We are the sacrifice zone. We always have been the sacrifice zones for the national interest and the economic prosperity of Canada right across. And I live in the province of Quebec, but I see all the provinces doing the same thing. So yeah, they can stamp their feet and show their emotional immaturity of not being willing and open to accept the fact that this is Indigenous land. You can call it Canada, you can call it Quebec, whatever you want. Good for you. It's still our land.
Yes, anyway, Canada and Quebec, both topony comes from Indigenous language.
Canada, that means a village in my language.
Yeah.
That they borrowed that. And I remember hearing a clan mother saying, one day maybe we're going to have to, the women are the ones who pick names, right? You put them in a basket and they give the names to a child when they're born. And because we gave Canada that name, she was saying that one day we're going to have to go to Canada and take that name back because they're not using it properly. It's not a village. It's not something that is welcoming to everybody. Only the ones that they choose, right? And so we as Indigenous people, the first peoples of Turtle Island, we feel like we are invisible. We feel that no matter how hard we extend a hand in peace and friendship, governments will stomp on our hands. So we're saying, like, nope, you can't do that anymore. We're not going to allow it. And I remember George Erasmus speaking, I think in 1990, and he says, I don't know exact the quote, but he says, you think that what you're seeing now is radicalism, but he says, wait till the next generation comes up. You will see, it would be pale in comparison. So I'm still waiting for them. We've had Idle No More, and that fizzed out for whatever reason. And I think we need another movement that is stronger, that is more sustainable. And it's, you know, I see just a few people doing that. And perhaps once the fires are gone and people can rebuild in their homes, and we can start talking about what reconciliation actually means, maybe there will be a peaceful society. Because if we look at the other part of Turtle Island, there's so much unrest, so much unkindness, so much mean-spiritedness. And, you know, it's okay to disagree. We don't have to disagree, but I still respect you. I don't see that happening in Canada. I don't see it happening in the United States or anywhere else where Indigenous peoples are concerned. So this is, I think, a lesson that Indigenous elders have been trying to convey, whether it's at the United Nations or where they live. And we are not being listened to. And look at the planet today. She is telling us, I am not taking this anymore. I've been, you know, talking to people. Some people have heard me, but the majority of you have not. You're just going on with capitalism. You're going on with treating your people like they're commodities, like they're just numbers, you know. And she's saying, enough, enough. You don't want to respect me. You're not thinking about this generation or future generations, that legacy. Then I'm going to react. And that is what she's doing.
And wear tobacco.
Pardon?
And you will wear
we will wear tobacco. Yeah, she's you know, right now the tobacco is getting strong. You know, it's the heavy water kind of wilted my tobacco. Not sure how anybody else is growing, but these are the kinds of things that we're hoping that will continue with the next generation, that they will understand the preciousness of life, that it's okay to say you want to live good, right? It's okay. You want to have nice things for your family, but you also have to teach those children what respect means. You know, you have to teach them what courage is and what love and compassion is. And I see some parents that are doing that, and I see some parents who are not. You know, if your child is saying, you know, I'm not going to do this and you can't make me, or, you know, when I was a kid, we'd go to social gatherings, whether it's rummage sales, Christmas, whatever, and all the old ladies would be sitting against the wall and they would watch us. You know, they'd watch us running around. And if we did anything, they would say, you know, you stop that, or else I'm going to tell your mother. We would never dare to say, you're not my mother. We would never, ever dare that, because we were taught to respect those elders. And sort of, you know, it was kind of like a cold water in the face. It's like, oh yeah, we have to do this. So I find it's not only are we losing those ways, and you know, I have great hope for the youth who are learning the languages. I was listening to a talk show in my community with a young woman who didn't grow up hearing the language. She was from Ganawag, and she was talking to an elder from Ganasadage. And she was asked, the elder was saying, like, how did you learn your language? And she learned in the adult immersion in Ganawag. And so this seems to be the only way that we're going to do it, because in school, it's really important for children to learn their language, but it's so, like, Quebec curriculum is so dominant in the schools that, you know, parents want their children to graduate high school and tick off all the boxes that you need to do that. So again, it's marginalized. And so it's only the adults who are going to be able to do that and, you know, teach their children and speak the language to them. So it's kind of like we've sort of come full circle, in a sense, in every aspect of our identity.
So I think you have many films in front of you.
Yeah, my next one is about economic development, in the sense of, when, because in 1990 there was a lot of stuff happening in Aguzasne, the bingo halls and the casinos and stuff like that, and the people were criminalized again for that. And so what does that mean for us to be economically prosperous? What does that mean? What are we going to do? What tools are we going to be using so that no one is left behind, that there is an equal decision-making process in how the land is used, and what is brought into our community? My community, we were never given a choice. We still don't have a choice. I feel more insecure than I've ever from amongst my own people. I fear more inside my community than I fear outside. And I didn't feel that 36 years ago. And I don't know what the answer is. All I know is that it's so chaotic. It's going to take a huge upheaval to change what is going on and to bring people back to their senses of what is not just morally right, but who are you as a Kanyakahaga person? It's not enough to fly a flag or wear a warrior t-shirt. That doesn't make you a warrior. That just makes you a wannabe, right? And some people are flying the Hiawatha belt, which is the Confederacy, the Iroquois Confederacy, purple and white flag. But they don't even understand what all those laws are or their obligations. They all think like, oh, I have a right to do this. Well, we all have rights. We also have responsibilities and obligations to fulfill. And right now, that's not what's happening.
But maybe hanging tobacco will brought back to the mind of many people's the rules and the tradition.
We'll
I
see.
suppose this is the purpose of the new film. Well, that we will discover soon. So we are all very comment dire, avoir hâte. We cannot wait to
you.
see the film, and thank you for having this conversation with us. Maybe we have time for one question, because Courtney Montour is coming, staying to the free, to have a podcast with Jean-François Bomsawin of Indigenous Screen Office. So we are tight on time, but I can maybe, if you have one question, I can transfer it. Yeah, yes.
One question. Why is it so important for your people to keep the Mohawk language?
Why is it important for French people to keep their French?
Same.
So it's just like the English do, just like the Russians do, just like the Palestinians with the Arabic. Language is only a part of you as your identity. And I think that language is also a form of thinking. It's a way of thinking, and we have over 250 words in Ganyageha that talk about the mind. So there's so much knowledge that is embedded in our language. And because French and German and all these are Latin languages, so if you broke them down, you would also see the roots. You can also see what the people were thinking at that time, right? So it's a link to that past, but it's also a way to the future, in helping us retain and preserve parts of our identity.
So I think no, sorry, we have to close now. So thank you, Ona.
Thank you for inviting me, Andre.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's okay. Et puis merci à nos techniciens.
La prochaine fois, sonoriser la salle
Oui, on a eu beaucoup de mal à vous
pour
entendre.
entendre mieux, quoi.
Ah oui. On va essayer ça.